Hello folks, this is Roger W. Knight, and I got another little commentary on things that I'd like to talk about. Uh, Overall, I intend to make some commentary on the problems that the Boeing company now has with the 737 MAX. I believe I have a pretty good idea how the company got into that fix and how it's doing something that threatens the jobs and livelihoods of a large part of the people of the state of Washington. But before I get into that, I realize that a full explanation could take like 2 hours, which is kind of a long time to ask people to sit through to listen to on YouTube. So I'm going to break it up into maybe 5 or 10 minute segments. This first segment will start at the very beginning of my engineering career, and that is the problem of getting your first job and in job interviews. I'll describe 2 job interviews, one where I did not get the job, and then the second one where I got hired on at Boeing, and what was different between the two, where I failed and where I succeeded. First of all, we look at the overall background of what it is for engineers. If you watch my Nautilus Elementary School video, toward the end of it, I describe the Apollo program that happened during my 4th and 5th grades and how it impacted the way the school was doing things. I believe we actually watched a launch on the television set inside the classroom during one of the launches. I seem to remember that. I don't know. I'll have to look up which Apollo program launched during the week, during the school year. But still, going to the moon is pretty exciting. It got a lot of kids interested in science and math and engineering, and we did. We got interested in all those things. Along with the fast cars with big 8-cylinder engines, we kind of liked those too. So, yeah, it got a lot of us interested in that, and as a result, I took a lot of science classes, a lot of math classes, and I eventually got my mechanical engineering degree at the University of Washington. After taking part of the study, I took enough physics class to almost minor in physics. So, I got a lot of exposure to a lot of math and a lot of science. And then I ran into the problem in 1982 when the great shortage of engineers just, poof, it vanished just as soon as I got the degree. The great shortage of engineers. We said, we need more engineers. We need more engineers. We haven't got enough engineers. By God, we're falling behind the Russians. We're falling behind the Chinese. We're falling behind the Japanese. We don't have enough engineers. So I get the degree. And I couldn't find that great shortage of engineers. Even though, just about 6 or 7 years before I finished high school, we were doing this. We were launching big Saturn V's and going to the moon. Well, what happened? Well, the first thing that happened was that our Congress, our President Nixon and such, determined that the moonshot was basically a great big stunt. Having accomplished the stunt, why are we continuing to send rockets to the moon? They cost money. So between Congress and President Nixon, they canceled the last 3 Apollo missions. We stopped at Apollo 17, and many of the astronauts from the earlier flights just quit the program right away because they were in the rotation for the later missions that got canceled. That's why, shortly after Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong walked the moon, they were no longer astronauts. Michael Collins was no longer an astronaut. That's part of what happened. Jim Lovell, we rode on several Apollo missions, including Apollo 8 and Apollo 13, and he didn't get to walk the moon, but he had his 2 Apollo missions, and then when the last 3 got canceled, well, he had no reason to stay with the state space program. So we lost a lot of talent because of that. There were other things going on. At that time, there was what I call a maturing of technologies. When a technology started really early, like say steam engines, the first 50 or so years of steam engines was an exciting time to be a steam engineer. I mean, James Watt was inventing all kinds of different things. James Joule was coming up with the relationship between foot-pounds and BTUs of energy. We had a lot of exciting experiments there and developments. The big steamships were being built, and the big warships of World War II was the culmination of the technology. But it matured, and well, you don't have a lot of jobs for steam engineers anymore. We have a few steam cycle designers for our new power plants. The nuclear power plants, I suppose, would be basically adapting a nuclear reactor to a steam cycle so it can generate electricity. But the technology is pretty much mature. You can get 40% efficiency out of a coal or gas-fired power plant, but you can't get beyond that. And until somebody does, then we're not going to see a whole lot of development of it. And the same thing with aircraft. The aircraft that Boeing and Airbus builds today looks a lot like the aircraft that were built in the 1960s. When the 1960s, the jet air age was new, and it was an exciting time to be an aircraft engineer. Nowadays, not so much. Believe me, it's just not so much. And I know this because I worked at Boeing. And I watched the whole aircraft engineering business become boring. I mean, seriously, not a lot of new developments after the 777. I mean, we tried building the plastic plane, and then we got the 737 MAX, a more efficient engine, and we adapted it to an airframe that was never designed to carry such a thing. And why that happened, well, I can go into that. But for job interviews, I graduate into literally no shortage of engineers. Can't find it. Can't even get interviews. They're few and far between. But the first interview that I actually got was with was as a civilian engineer for the U.S. Navy in Bremerton. So I get on my suit and tie, and I comb my hair, and I get in my car, and I drive around the Narrows Bridge to Bremerton. And I park outside the naval base there, and I go in where they told me to. And the guy doing the interview walked me in there. He asked me a few questions about what I knew about fluid mechanics. And I confessed that I got the highest score in the class in my fluid mechanics midterm. Got a real good score on there. And I says, well, with about submarines, they're big bulbous submarines. The reason they're shaped that way, obviously, is to try to keep the flow of water around the submarine from becoming turbulent as opposed to laminar. A laminar flowing is a little quieter, whereas a turbulent flow sounds like this, which kind of tells every sonophone in the ocean, every whale in the ocean, there's a submarine there. So the idea is to quietly glide through the water without making a lot of noise, including the noise from the turbulence of the water flowing around the sub. And he thanked me for coming in, and he escorted me out of the facility, and it's been 10 minutes. What the hell did I do wrong? Well, feedback later on came that the guy thought I was some kind of know-it-all, because I was trying to show him that I had the potential to be, the Nikola Tesla of fluid mechanics. I mean, this was the U.S. Navy. That's what I thought they were asking for. That's what I thought they were looking for. Well, the guy wasn't looking for the best and brightest, not if the guy is smarter than him. I found out later that a lot of people in the real world is that he probably was looking for a guy smart enough to do the chicken shit task that he had there, but he didn't want somebody smart enough to upend his organization, to see through him. From the point of view of a supervisor, the smart engineer is the dangerous engineer, because he can see through your BS, and he can figure out how to get around your BS and all that. And yeah, that's probably good for the company, good for the organization, but not necessarily good for the supervisor that hires him. So they're afraid to hire the top 1% of the graduating class of engineers. Most of the jobs that are advertised where they call you in, they're not calling you in because you're the top 1%. So if you act smarter than what they're wanting, you can blow the job interview. Now the next interview where I got the job, I got a couple other interviews, but the next interview where I got the job was at Boeing. The supervisor brought me in, introduced me around the group. It was involving MX missiles in missile silos program, and he was talking about how they were using the CATS 4X computer system, and he asked me what I knew about computers. He didn't ask me a lot about mechanical engineering because that's the degree I had. I had the degree, and the transcript said that what I knew there, so he didn't feel he needed to ask me. Although he asked me if I knew anything about computers, and I admitted that, well, I took a Fortran class, so I had some experience with coding, and I understood that, at the time you had a mainframe somewhere and you had a terminal at your desk that you worked at, which you communicated with the mainframe. Of course, the equivalence today is that this desk station here, this is the mainframe. You see, I mean, but in 1984, the computer systems, they looked kind of like this, and you had a mouse and you had the screen, but instead of having your processor and hard drives right there, that was done on a mainframe somewhere else. This was 1984. So what happened was that I didn't major in computer science, so I could not and did not give any kind of dissertational answer. I just kind of told him enough that I understood what the technology is and that I could be trained in how to use it fairly quickly. And I got the job. That's how I got the job at Boeing. So there's the two contrasting. Where I thought the guy was looking for somebody who could be like the Nikola Tesla of fluid mechanics, he didn't hire me, even though it was the U.S. Navy. Whereas at Boeing, the guy asked me about some technology that I wasn't an expert in, and I got the job because I didn't bore him with a dissertational answer. So that's the thing, and I scratched my nose. That's pretty much how that happens. And so if you're a young engineer, you got your degree and you're trying to get your first job, maybe you need to tone it down if you want to get the job. But I will say this also. You have no idea what an interviewer is looking for. You don't. If you guess wrong, you blow the interview. But it's not your fault you blew the interview because you never worked with a company before. You don't know what it is that they expect you to do on the job. All you know is that you can show up for the interview and show them some characteristics that sound like that might be compatible with his group, and he'll hire you if he thinks you have the characteristics, and if he thinks you don't, he won't hire you. And it's not that these characteristics are good or bad, it's just the way it is. The one thing, though, is the Trump boom. That is your big advantage today, is that there are lots of job openings. So you can get interviews, and as we all know, you only have to be successful once in your job interviews. You can blow 9 job interviews, but if you're successful in the 10th job interview, you got a job, right? You can blow 9 of them, and still, the one that you're successful in, you got the job. But you have to be able to get interviews. That's the difference between the Trump boom and the entire time from 1969 to 2016. I mean, we're talking about the employment rates. The unemployment rate's the lowest it's been since 1969. So I'm saying it's not your imagination. The job market really did stink to high heaven your entire adult life prior to the election of Donald J. Trump. That's why so many of us love the guy, is they brought the jobs home. And the economy's booming enough that we can get jobs. But it wasn't that way. So that's my experience with that. The space program that we were so excited about when I was at Nautilus Elementary School, well, it got canceled. And every military program, including the MX missile system and such, just became a ridiculous political football. So you never know whether a program will be fully funded if you're on it. And the design of other technologies, such as aircraft, became boring. I'll talk to you about that in other videos after I'm done with this one. Have a nice day, and I'll talk to you again.